In the unforgiving Apache territory of 1872, winter's icy fingers reached across the landscape like a ghost seeking souls. Amid the scattered juniper and weathered sage, a young woman lay curled against the brutal cold, abandoned by her own people, to die. The ancient winds carried her shallow breaths across the canyon walls, whispering tales of despair to anyone who would listen. But fate had other plans. As dawn broke over the frost-covered ground, an Apache warrior discovered her nearly lifeless form. His people's laws were clear. Outsiders meant death. Yet something stirred in his heart, an echo of the old ways that spoke of compassion before fear. In that moment, his choice would ignite a flame that would spread through his tribe like wildfire, challenging generations of rigid tradition. But would this single act of mercy cost him everything he held dear? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last thing Sarah Blackwood remembered was the weight of her mother's silver cross against her chest, its cold metal pressing into her skin like an accusation. 3 nights had passed since the elders of New Haven settlement had declared her a witch, binding her hands with rough hemp rope and driving her into the wilderness. Her crime, healing young Thomas Miller's fever with a poultice of wild herbs, knowledge learned in secret from the medicine woman who visited their trading post each spring. The beadwork on her buckskin dress, a gift from that same medicine. Woman caught the dim starlight as she stumbled through the darkness. Each step carried her further from everything she had ever known, every footfall a reminder of Elder Johnston's final words. The devil's knowledge cannot abide among God's chosen people. Sarah had grown up watching her father trade with the native tribes, learning their languages in whispered conversations while her mother wasn't listening. That same mother who now stood silent as the settlement cast out her only daughter, her eyes fixed on the ground as Sarah pleaded for mercy. The memories of those final moments in New Haven burned sharper than the bitter wind that now cut through her clothing. For 3 days, she had wandered without food, her water flask long since emptied. The terrain grew increasingly unfamiliar as she pushed deeper into Apache territory, hoping against hope to find the medicine woman's people. But the early winter storm had erased any trace of trails, leaving her lost in a maze of twisted juniper and towering canyon walls. On the second night, the wolves had come. Their howls echoed through the canyons, driving her to climb a scraggly pine tree where she huddled until dawn, her fingers nearly frozen to the bark. When morning came, she descended on trembling legs, knowing she needed to find shelter before the next nightfall. The sun had barely risen on the 3rd day when the snow began to fall. Fat white flakes that melted on her face like tears, gradually transforming the landscape into an alien world of white silence. Sarah stumbled on, her thoughts growing as clouded as the sky above. She found herself humming hymns from Sunday service, their familiar melodies a bitter comfort in the wilderness. Somewhere in the gathering dusk of that 3rd day, her legs finally gave out. She collapsed beneath an ancient juniper, its gnarled branches offering meager shelter from the steadily falling snow. As consciousness slipped away, Sarah thought she heard her grandmother's voice, singing the old songs that had so scandalized the settlement's elders. Songs that spoke of Earth's wisdom and nature's healing power, songs that had first drawn her to study the plants and their ancient medicinal uses. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a raven perched on a snow-laden branch above. In her delirium, she imagined it wore the silver cross that had once hung around her neck, now lost somewhere in the vast wilderness that would become her grave. The bird's dark eyes seemed to hold all the judgment of New Haven's elders, yet also something else, something that might have been pity or perhaps promise. As Sarah's awareness faded, the wind picked up, carrying snowflakes in spiral patterns through the air. They danced like the spirits her grandmother had spoken of, those ancient beings who watched over the lost and dying. She wondered if they would watch over her now, this exile from two worlds, too native for the settlers and too settled for the natives. Her final conscious thought was a prayer, not to the stern God of Elder Johnston's sermons, but to the gentler spirits her grandmother had taught her about in secret. She prayed not for rescue, it was far too late for that, but for understanding of why the gift of healing had brought such fear and hatred among those who claimed to serve a healing God. The snow continued to fall as Sarah Blackwood, the witch of New Haven settlement, slipped into unconsciousness. The junipers, shadows grew longer, and the raven took flight, its wings cutting through the gathering darkness like a promise of dawn yet to come. Unknown to Sarah, that promise would arrive with the morning light, carried on the footsteps of a warrior who would defy his own people's laws to answer an ancient call of mercy. Nahuel moved through the snow-laden landscape like a shadow, his moccasins leaving barely a trace on the fresh powder. His medicine pouch, heavy with herbs gathered before the storm, bounced gently against his hip with each step. The rising sun painted the canyon walls in shades of amber and rose, but his thoughts remained dark as winter storm clouds. 3 days ago, the council had reinforced the old laws. Any outsider found in their territory was to be killed on sight. The white settlers had been pushing closer to their hunting grounds, and fear had hardened the hearts of even the wisest elders. Nahuel touched the worn leather of his medicine pouch, remembering his grandmother's words, "When fear rules the heart, wisdom dies in silence." His grandmother, Standing Birch, was one of the few who still remembered the old ways, before fear of the settlers had turned their tribe inward. She had taught him the healing arts in secret, sharing knowledge that the council now considered dangerous, too likely to encourage contact with outsiders. The fresh snow had transformed the familiar terrain into something mysterious and new. Nahuel read the morning story written in tracks across the white canvas: deer moving south toward lower elevations, a fox hunting in the pre-dawn hours, and he stopped abruptly. There, beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient juniper, lay a shape that didn't belong. Drawing closer, his hand instinctively moved to the knife at his belt. But as he approached, the warrior's caution gave way to healer's concern. The young woman lay curled against the tree's trunk, her skin nearly as white as the snow around her. Her clothes, a strange mix of settler and native craft, told a story that stirred something in Nahuel's heart. The beadwork on her dress caught his eye, patterns he recognized from the northern tribes, speaking of healing and protection. This was no ordinary settler. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. The spirits send us tests disguised as choices. Was this such a test? The law was clear. He should end her suffering quickly and return to the village. The council would praise his vigilance, yet his fingers found their way to his medicine pouch, touching the herbs within. The same herbs his grandmother had taught him to use, knowledge passed down through generations before fear had built walls between peoples. Nahuel knelt beside her still form, checking for signs of life. A faint pulse fluttered beneath his fingers like a trapped bird. She lived, but barely. The decision before him stretched out like the shadow of the juniper across the snow. Dark, long and heavy with consequence. To save her would mean defying the council, risking not just his own standing, but his family's safety. The young warriors who looked to him for guidance would be forced to choose between loyalty to him and obedience to tribal law. His grandmother, already viewed with suspicion for her adherence to old ways, would face further scrutiny. Yet as he watched the woman's shallow breathing, Nahuel remembered another teaching. His grandfather, long since passed to the spirit world, had told him of times when different tribes shared knowledge freely, when healing wisdom flowed between peoples like water between streams, before fear had dammed the rivers of understanding. The medicine pouch at his hip seemed to grow heavier, as if filled with the weight of all the choices that had led to this moment. He touched the small deerskin bag that contained his most precious herbs, plants that could mean the difference between life and death for the stranger before him. The sound of distant voices carried on the wind, the morning hunting party making their rounds. Soon they would pass this way, and his choice would be made for him. The woman stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her lips. In that sound, Nahuel heard an echo of his people's own suffering, their own fears of being driven from their lands, of losing their way of life. Standing slowly, he made his decision, not with the warrior's swiftness that the council praised, but with the healer's deliberation his grandmother had taught him. Carefully, he lifted the woman's limp form from the snow. She weighed less than he expected, as if the journey that had brought her here had burned away everything but essential spirit. As he turned toward the hidden canyon where his family's winter camp lay, Nahuel whispered a prayer to the spirits of his ancestors, not for protection from the council's wrath, that would come soon enough, but for the wisdom to walk the path that lay before him, a path that might lead his people either to destruction or to a new understanding of the old ways. The sun climbed higher as Nahuel carried his burden through the deepening snow, each step taking him further from the warrior's duty and closer to the healer's calling. Behind him, the juniper stood sentinel, its ancient branches heavy with snow and secrets, while ahead the canyon walls opened like arms to embrace whatever future his choice would bring. The hidden canyon opened like a secret kept by the earth itself. Nahuel followed the narrow path that wound between towering red rock walls, their surfaces adorned with ancient petroglyphs, healing hands and spirit symbols carved by ancestors whose names had long since fallen into silence. Here, away from the council's watchful eyes, his family maintained the old ways in quiet defiance of changing times. Steam rose from a small hot spring that emerged from the canyon wall, its mineral-rich waters turning the air misty in the cold morning light. Near the spring, his grandmother's lodge stood apart from the others, marked by bundles of drying herbs and strings of sacred objects that chimed softly in the breeze. Standing Birch was already waiting outside her lodge, as if she had read the morning's events in her dreams. Her face, weathered by nearly 8 decades of sun and wind, revealed nothing as she watched her grandson approach with his burden. Only her eyes, dark and deep as mountain pools, showed a glimmer of something that might have been approval. "The spirits are restless today," she said simply, holding back the lodge's deer-hide flap. "They whisper of choices that will echo through generations." Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of burning sage and cedar. Nahuel gently laid Sarah on a bed of soft furs near the central fire. Standing, Birch moved with surprising agility for her age, gathering supplies from various pouches and baskets hung from the lodge poles. "She carries 2 medicines," the old woman observed, examining the beadwork on Sarah's dress. "One of our people, one of theirs. Perhaps the spirit sent her to remind us that wisdom knows no boundaries." She pulled a small clay pot from the embers, where a mixture of herbs had been steeping. "Like this medicine. Some plants I learned from my mother, others from a Navajo woman who once sought shelter here, just as this one does now." Nahuel watched as his grandmother worked, her gnarled fingers sure and gentle as she examined Sarah's frost-bitten extremities. "The council," he began, but Standing Birch cut him off with a sharp gesture. "The council sees with eyes clouded by fear," she said, applying warm compresses to Sarah's hands and feet. "They forget that our strength came not from hiding behind walls of tradition, but from learning to bend like the willow in the storm." She paused, touching the silver cross that still hung around Sarah's neck. "Even this, their symbol, was once strange to us. Now some of our people wear it alongside their medicine pouches. Change comes, whether we welcome it or not." As morning stretched toward noon, others from Nahuel's family group discovered his actions. His younger sister, Swift Fox, slipped into the lodge with extra furs and food, her eyes wide with curiosity. His cousin Greyhorse arrived soon after, bringing news that the council hunters had found tracks in the snow near the juniper tree. "They will follow them here," Greyhorse warned, but there was no condemnation in his voice. Like many of the younger warriors, he had grown increasingly unsettled by the council's rigid stance against all outsiders. Standing, Birch laughed softly. As she worked, a sound like wind through autumn leaves. "Let them come," she said. "Perhaps seeing this girl will remind them of their own stories, of times when our people were the ones who needed mercy from strangers." Throughout the day, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, she spoke in confused fragments, mixing English with surprisingly fluent Apache phrases. Standing Birch listened intently to her fevered murmurings, nodding occasionally, as if hearing confirmation of something long suspected. "She knows our healing ways," the old woman told Nahuel as the sun began to set. "Not just the plants, but the prayers that go with them. Someone taught her with care and respect." She stirred the fire thoughtfully. "There are others among the white settlers who remember that all medicine comes from the same earth, all wisdom from the same sky. We are not as different as fear would have us believe." As darkness fell, more family members gathered in and around the lodge, drawn by both concern and curiosity. They spoke in hushed voices of changes coming to their world, of choices between adaptation and extinction. The ancient petroglyphs on the canyon walls seemed to watch their discussion with ages-old patience, their meanings shifting like shadows in the firelight. Standing Birch moved among them, sharing stories of times past when their people had faced similar challenges. She spoke of how the tribe had survived not by rigid adherence to tradition, but by learning to weave new threads into the fabric of their culture while keeping the essential patterns intact. "Look there," she said, pointing to where Sarah lay sleeping more peacefully now. "The spirits did not send us a simple test of our laws. They sent us a mirror, showing us what we might become if we let fear rule our hearts. Alone, cast out, freezing in the darkness. Or," she touched the medicine pouch at her side, "they sent us a bridge between worlds, if we have the courage to see it." As the night deepened, Nahuel sat near the lodge entrance, watching the stars emerge above the canyon walls. His grandmother's words mixed with the soft sounds of Sarah's breathing and the quiet conversations of his family. In the morning he knew word of his choice would reach the council. The real test would begin then. But for now, in this hidden canyon where ancient wisdom still held sway, he felt a deep certainty that he had chosen rightly. The healing hands carved into the canyon walls seemed to glow faintly in the starlight, reaching across centuries to touch this moment of change. Tatiti, warning feather, arrived at dawn, its red-stained tip carrying the council's message as clearly as any written word. Black Bear, the council's lead warrior, had tied it himself to the branch outside Nahuel's family lodge. The meaning was clear. Judgment was coming. Inside Standing Birch's lodge, Sarah had finally woken fully, her eyes clear and alert for the first time in days. She sat wrapped in warm furs near the fire, watching as Nahuel's family members came and went, each bringing news of growing unrest throughout the tribe. "The council gathers," reported Swift Fox, her usual cheerful demeanor. "Subdued. They speak of pollution of our bloodlines, of weakness spreading like disease." She hesitated, glancing at Sarah. "But others whisper different words. Some of the younger warriors remember the stories of how our own people were once helped by strangers." Standing Birch continued grinding herbs with her stone mortar, the rhythmic sound a counterpoint to the tension in the air. "Fear always speaks loudest at first," she said, "but wisdom, like water, finds its own path through the rocks." Outside, the winter sun climbed higher, casting the canyon walls in sharp relief. The ancient petroglyphs seemed to watch the day's events unfold with silent understanding. More members of the tribe had begun appearing at the canyon's entrance, some bearing gifts of food or medicine, others simply coming to see the stranger who had caused such upheaval. Black Bear himself arrived near midday, his massive frame blocking the lodge's entrance. The warning feather was clutched in his hand, its red tip bright against his dark skin. "You know why I come, Standing Birch," he said, his deep voice carrying both respect and steel. "The council demands the outsider." The old woman didn't look up from her work. "I remember when you were a boy, Black Bear," she said, continuing to grind her herbs. "You came to me with fever, and I used medicines learned from a Navajo healer to save your life. Was that knowledge less valuable because it came from outside our tribe?" The warrior shifted uncomfortably, but held his ground. "The times are different now. The settlers push closer every season. We cannot show weakness." "Is mercy weakness?" This from Nahuel, who stood at his grandmother's side. "Or is fear the true weakness that will destroy us?" More tribal members had gathered to watch the confrontation, their faces reflecting the division that ran through the community. Some nodded at Nahuel's words, while others clutched their weapons tighter, as if the very idea of change threatened their survival. Sarah, understanding more than anyone expected, spoke suddenly in clear Apache. "I carry 2 medicines, as your elder says. Is not understanding between peoples a strength rather than a weakness?" Black Bear's hand moved to his knife, but several young warriors stepped forward, including Grey Horse. "We stand with Nahuel," Grey Horse declared. "The old ways speak of wisdom shared between peoples. When did fear make us forget this?" The confrontation might have turned violent then, but Standing Birch rose with surprising speed. She moved to the lodge entrance, her small frame somehow filling the space. In her hand, she held a medicine pouch that drew every eye. It was ancient, its leather darkened with age, decorated with beadwork that combined patterns from many tribes. "This belonged to my grandmother's grandmother," she said, her voice carrying to all who had gathered. "In it are medicines gathered from every tribe that ever shared knowledge with our people. Without this sharing, half our healing wisdom would be lost. Without the courage to learn from others, we would be half the people we are." Black Bear's face showed the conflict within him. He was a warrior of the old school, but he had also been one of Standing Birch's patients as a child. Finally, he spoke. "The council must be answered. I cannot return empty-handed." "Then take them a message," Standing Birch replied. "Tell them that in this canyon the ancient ways are still honored, not just our own ways, but the older wisdom that taught us to learn from all who cross our path. Tell them that strength comes not from walls built of fear, but from bridges built of understanding." The warrior studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will take your words to them, but be warned, they will not accept this easily. Change comes hard to those who have lived long with fear." As Black Bear departed, his warning hung in the air like winter frost. The gathered tribal members began to disperse, talking in low voices about what they had witnessed. Some moved closer to Standing Birch's lodge, offering support through their presence. Others hurried away to carry news of the confrontation throughout the tribe. Nahuel watched them go, understanding that this was only the beginning. The warning feather had drawn its line in the snow, and soon everyone would have to choose which side to stand on. But as he turned back to the lodge, he saw Sarah helping his grandmother prepare medicines, their hands moving in the same rhythms, their knowledge flowing together like streams joining into a river. In that moment, despite the growing storm of conflict, he felt again the rightness of his choice. The healing hands on the canyon walls seemed to agree, their ancient outlines catching the light like promises written in stone. The shared medicine bowl sat between them, its clay surface worn smooth by generations of healers' hands. Standing, Birch watched as Sarah's fingers moved over her collection of dried herbs, selecting each with the careful precision that spoke of deep knowledge. The young woman had recovered her strength quickly, revealing a healer's spirit that transcended the boundaries of culture. "This one," Sarah said in Apache, holding up a sprig of sage, "my grandmother called spirit's breath. You name it differently, but its power is the same." She added it to the bowl where other herbs were already steeping. "And this," she continued, "selecting another plant, grows near the settlers' towns, but I've seen it here in the canyon too. Two peoples, one medicine." Their quiet work was interrupted by urgent voices outside the lodge. Swift Fox burst through the entrance, carrying her young son who burned with fever. "The winter sickness," she said, fear making her voice sharp. "3 other children in the main camp have fallen ill as well." Standing Birch reached for her medicines, but Sarah was already moving, her hands sure as she tested the child's temperature. "I know this fever," she said, switching to English. "In her concentration, it swept through our settlement last winter. The traditional remedies weren't enough, but I found that when combined with certain native plants—" She paused, looking uncertainly at Standing Birch. The old woman nodded encouragingly. "Knowledge is like water," she said. "It must flow freely. To bring life," she gestured to her own medicine stores. "Show us." What followed was a dance of shared wisdom as Sarah and Standing Birch worked together to prepare the medicine. Sarah explained how she had discovered that a tea made from settler-known herbs, when combined with traditional Apache fever remedies, could break even the most stubborn winter fever. Standing Birch listened intently, occasionally adding her own knowledge to strengthen the mixture. Swift Fox watched with both hope and amazement as her son sipped the combined medicine from the shared bowl. By sunset, his fever had broken, and word of the successful healing had spread throughout the tribe. More mothers arrived at the lodge, carrying sick children or seeking preventive medicines. "We heard the outsider knows strong medicine," said one woman, her face half hidden by her shawl. She was the wife of a council member, yet here she stood, holding her feverish daughter. "The council speaks against her, but a mother's heart speaks louder than law when her child is sick." As the day progressed, the lodge became a place of quiet revolution. Women who had never spoken against the council's laws found their voices, sharing stories of their own grandmothers who had traded medical knowledge with other tribes and even settlers. The shared medicine bowl passed from hand to hand, carrying not just healing, but understanding. Standing Birch moved among them, her presence lending authority to this blending of traditions. "See how the spirits work," she would say, watching. "Sarah, teach a young mother how to prepare the combined remedies. They send us sickness to remind us that all peoples share the same fears, and they send us healing to show us that wisdom knows no boundaries." Even some of the warriors who had stood with Black Bear began to shift their stance. Grey Horse's brother, who had initially supported the council's position, arrived carrying his young son. "My wife insisted," he said gruffly, but his eyes showed gratitude when the boy's cough eased after drinking the mixed medicine. As night fell, Sarah and Standing Birch sat together by the fire, preparing more medicines for the next day. The shared bowl between them had been emptied and refilled many times, each use wearing the clay a little smoother, adding another layer to its history of healing. "In my settlement," Sarah said softly, "they called this witchcraft. They feared what they didn't understand, just as your council does. But today, I saw something different. I saw people choosing hope over fear." Standing Birch nodded, adding herbs to the bowl with practiced hands. "The council builds walls, but sickness flows under them like water. Today, many have tasted the sweetness of shared wisdom. They will not easily forget its flavor." She looked at Sarah with knowing eyes. "You carry a gift that is neither white nor Apache, but simply human, the gift of healing. This is what my grandson saw when he found you in the snow." Outside the lodge, the night wind carried the sounds of the tribe. Children's laughter, mothers' soft singing, the murmur of conversations about change and tradition. The shared medicine bowl sat between the two healers. its contents reflecting the firelight like captured stars, while above them the healing hands carved into the canyon walls bore silent witness to this bridging of worlds. The war staff appeared, before sunrise, thrust into the earth at the canyon's entrance. Its red ribbons snapped in the bitter wind like tongues of flame, carrying the council's final warning. No more words would come, only action. Nahuel stood at the canyon's mouth, studying the staff's position. Behind him, the first rays of sun painted the canyon walls blood red, making the ancient petroglyphs seem to writhe with untold stories. Grey Horse and a dozen other young warriors had arrived through the night, their presence both protection and defiance. "They will come with the sun," Grey Horse said, checking his weapons with practiced hands. Black Bear sent word. "The council means to end this today, before the tribe's support for the outsider grows stronger." Inside the hidden canyon, more supporters had gathered. Women whose children had been healed by Sarah's medicines stood with grim determination, some carrying their own weapons. The night had brought more allies, elderly healers who remembered the old ways, younger warriors questioning the path of fear, families who had seen the power of shared wisdom. Standing Birch emerged from her lodge, Sarah at her side. The old woman carried a bundle wrapped in deerskin, while Sarah wore her original dress, its beadwork catching the morning light. The mixed medicines they had prepared through the night filled every available container, a testament to their shared knowledge and preparation for whatever might come. "They fear this most of all," Standing Birch said, unwrapping her bundle to reveal an ancient war staff of her own, its ribbons faded but intact. Not the mixing of medicines, but the mixing of hearts. When people see each other's humanity, walls built of fear begin to crumble. The sun had barely cleared the canyon rim when the first shouts echoed across the landscape. Black Bear appeared at the head of a large group of council warriors, their weapons ready, but their faces troubled. Many had family members among those, supporting Nahuel and Sarah. "This is your last chance," Black Bear called, his voice carrying authority and reluctance in equal measure. "Surrender the outsider and submit to the council's judgment. The old laws must be upheld." Nahuel stepped forward, standing tall beside the council's war staff. "The oldest law is survival," he replied. "Our people survived by learning from others, by sharing wisdom, by choosing knowledge over fear. Look around you, Black Bear. See how many stand with us. Ask yourself why." The tension crackled like static before a storm. Warriors on both sides gripped their weapons tighter, while mothers pulled their children closer. Sarah moved to stand beside Nahuel, her voice clear in the morning air as she addressed the council warriors in their own tongue. "I carry 2 medicines as your elders once did. My presence here was not chosen. The spirits led your warrior to find me in the snow. Since then, I have shared what I know freely, as your ancestors shared with mine. Is this the pollution you fear, or is it the mirror we hold to your own fears?" Her words struck home. Several council warriors shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own children drinking from the shared medicine bowl. Black Bear himself seemed to wage an internal battle, his loyalty to the council warring with deeper truths. The confrontation might have erupted then, but Standing Birch chose that moment to act. With surprising agility, she walked through the line of defenders and approached Black Bear directly. In her hands, she held both her ancient war staff and the shared medicine bowl. "You drank from this bowl as a child," she reminded him. "Its medicines came from many peoples, Apache, Navajo, even settlers who traded knowledge for healing. Would you spill it now? Would you wash away the wisdom of generations because fear speaks louder than memory?" The first violence came not from Black Bear, but from a younger council warrior at the edge of the group. His arrow flew wild, striking the shared medicine bowl in Standing Birch's hands. The clay vessel shattered, its contents seeping into the earth like blood. The moment hung suspended, like a breath held too long. Then Grey Horse's warriors surged forward, met by the council's forces. The clash of weapons filled the air. But something had changed. The broken medicine bowl had drawn a new line, not between council and rebels, but between those who would destroy wisdom and those who would preserve it. Black Bear's voice rose above the chaos. "Hold! Hold your weapons!" But the damage was done. The symbolic breaking of the medicine bowl had broken something else, the council's unquestioned authority. Warriors from both sides began to lower their weapons, looking at each other with new understanding. As the dust settled, Nahuel stood at the canyon's entrance, Sarah beside him, while Standing Birch gathered the broken pieces of the medicine bowl. The old woman's voice carried to all who could hear, "Some things, once broken, can never be made whole in the same way, but perhaps they can be remade into something stronger, something that carries both the memory of what was and the promise of what might be." The sun climbed higher, casting no shadows on the truth that now lay exposed. The tribe stood at a crossroads, and no amount of council authority could force them back onto the path of fear. The war staff's red ribbons continued to flutter, but now they seemed to speak not of warning, but of change, carried on the winter wind. The sacred tribal scroll, its buffalo hide surface dark with age, lay unrolled upon Standing Birch's lodge floor. Few knew of its existence. The council had declared such records dangerous, too likely to challenge their interpretation of tribal law. But Standing Birch had preserved it, along with other remnants of their people's deeper history. "Look here," she said, her finger tracing faded pictographs that danced across the hide. "This tells of the time of great hunger, when our people survived only because the Navajo shared their knowledge of desert plants. And here, the story of White Dove, a settler woman who learned our ways and became a respected healer among our people." The lodge was crowded with tribal members, many seeing the ancient scroll for the first time. After the confrontation at dawn, an uneasy truce had settled over the canyon. Black Bear himself sat among them, his warrior's pride warring with growing doubt. "Our ancestors recorded these stories not to bind us to the past," Standing Birch continued, "but to guide us through times of change. They knew wisdom must flow like water, finding new paths when old channels become blocked." Sarah sat beside her, helping to translate symbols that matched stories from her own grandmother's teachings. "These markings," she said, pointing to a series of interwoven spirals, "they appear in my people's oldest tales as well. They speak of healing knowledge passed between tribes, of wisdom that belongs to no single people." "A convenient interpretation," rumbled Black Bear, but his voice lacked conviction. His eyes kept returning to a particular scene on the scroll. The story of his own ancestor, a healer who had learned life-saving medicines from neighboring tribes during a great plague. Standing Birch nodded to young Hawk, one of the tribal songkeepers who had joined their cause. He began to sing in the old way, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "When the earth was young and wisdom flowed free, all peoples drank from the same ancient spring. Fear built walls where bridges used to be. Now wisdom whispers, 'Remember and sing.'" Other elders joined in, their voices weaving together songs that hadn't been heard in the main camp for generations, songs that told of times when different peoples came together, sharing knowledge that made all stronger. Grey Horse's mother, a quiet woman who rarely spoke in tribal gatherings, suddenly raised her voice. "I remember these songs. My grandmother sang them while gathering medicines. She taught me that healing wisdom comes from the earth itself, which knows no boundaries between peoples." More memories began to surface, as if the ancient scroll had unlocked a door long kept shut by fear. An old warrior recalled how his grandfather had learned to treat arrow wounds from a captured Mexican healer, knowledge that later saved many. Tribal warriors. A mother remembered stories of her ancestors trading medical wisdom with plains tribes, each exchange enriching both peoples. Black Bear listened to it all, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally he spoke. "The council teaches that our strength lies in remaining pure, unchanged. But these records show our people grew stronger through change, through learning from others. He touched the scroll with calloused fingers. How did we forget this? Fear is a powerful medicine. Standing Birch replied. It can protect, but it can also poison. The Council's fear of change has become a sickness in itself, making us forget our own stories. Sarah had been studying a particular section of the scroll intently. These marks, she said, they're like the beadwork patterns on my dress, the ones your people taught my grandmother's people. The scroll shows the same pattern being passed between tribes as a symbol of healing wisdom. Young Hawk began another song, this one speaking of a time when different peoples would come together, sharing wisdom that had been scattered like seeds in the wind. Other voices joined in, the ancient harmonies filling the lodge with power that seemed to make the very walls vibrate. As the song faded, Standing Birch carefully rolled the scroll, her movements deliberate and reverent. Our ancestors knew that wisdom, like water, cannot be held in one pair of hands. It must flow freely to remain pure. They recorded these stories, not to show us who we were, but to remind us who we might become. Black Bear rose slowly, his massive frame casting shadows in the lodge's firelight. These songs, these stories, the Council called them dangerous dreams of the past, but I begin to see they are maps to our future. He looked at Sarah, then at Nahuel. The question remains, how do we walk this path without losing ourselves? Standing Birch's answer came with the weight of generations. We are Apache. Our strength has always been in adapting while keeping our core truths. The scroll shows us that sharing wisdom makes us stronger, not weaker. This is not a new path. It is the oldest path of all, hidden by fear, but not destroyed. Outside the lodge, the winter wind had begun to sing its own song, weaving through the canyon walls where ancient hands had carved their messages of healing and hope. The war staff's red ribbons now moved to this melody, no longer a threat, but a reminder that change, like the wind itself, could not be held back by any human barrier. The peace pipe lay shattered on the canyon floor, its sacred bowl split cleanly in two. The breaking had come at the hands of Stoneface, the most hardline of the council members, who had arrived with a contingent of warriors as the sun reached its peak. His action, destroying the very symbol of tribal negotiation, spoke louder than any words could have. Enough of ancient scrolls and grandmother's tales, Stoneface spat, his scarred face twisted with contempt. The council's authority comes not from dead ancestors, but from the need to survive. The outsider dies today, along with any who stand with her. The moment hung suspended in the winter air, sharp as obsidian. Black Bear, who had remained in the canyon after the morning's revelations, stood slowly. His massive frame seemed to fill the space between Stoneface's warriors and the growing group of tribal members who had gathered around Standing Birch's lodge. You break the peace pipe, Black Bear said, his voice heavy with significance. But do you understand what that means? Our ancestors used this pipe to make peace even with enemies. In breaking it, you break with all our traditions, not just the ones that inconvenience you. Stoneface's hand moved to his knife. Traditions change. The council makes the law now. The council serves the people, came Standing Birch's voice as she emerged from her lodge. It does not own them. In her hands, she carried the two halves of the broken pipe, holding them up so all could see. Look well at this breaking. It shows us the true division, not between old ways and new, but between wisdom and fear. Sarah stood beside her, dressed now in a mixture of her original clothing and Apache garments given by the women she had helped heal. Her voice carried clearly in Apache. I have seen this before, in my own people. When fear rules, it first breaks. The very tools of peace. Stoneface's warriors shifted uneasily. Many had family members among those who stood with Nahuel and Sarah. The breaking of the peace pipe, a sacred object that had been used in tribal ceremonies for generations, had shaken them more than any words could have. The confrontation might have ended there, but Stoneface was not finished. He gestured to his warriors, who began to move forward. "Take the outsider," he commanded. "Kill any who resist." What followed was chaos, but chaos with its own terrible pattern. Family members found themselves facing family members. The sounds of struggle echoed off canyon walls that had witnessed centuries of tribal history. But this was different from the morning's brief clash. This was the true breaking point. Nahuel moved like wind through grass, placing himself between Sarah and the advancing warriors. Grey Horse and his followers formed a protective circle, their weapons ready, but their faces showing the pain of facing their own people. Black Bear, in a moment that would be remembered in tribal stories, stepped away from Stoneface to stand with Standing Birch. "I choose wisdom over fear," he declared, his voice carrying to all corners of the canyon. The first blood was drawn, when one of Stoneface's warriors, aiming for Sarah, struck Young Hawk instead. The Songkeeper fell, his blood staining the winter earth, but his voice rose in an ancient war song, not of victory, but of transformation. When brothers fight brothers, the earth herself weeps, but from broken vessels new wisdom seeps. The sight of Young Hawk's blood seemed to break something in the tribal consciousness. Warriors on both sides lowered their weapons, moved by the Songkeeper's words and the reality of what they were doing. Even Stoneface's most loyal followers began to step back, their faces showing the dawning recognition of what they had almost destroyed. Standing, Birch moved through the chaos like a spirit, still carrying the broken peace pipe. "See what fear has brought us to," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We break our sacred objects, spill our own blood, forget our own stories, all because we fear what we do not understand." Sarah, who had been trying to reach Young Hawk to tend his wound, spoke up. "In my settlement, fear turned neighbor against neighbor, family against family. Is this not what your council claims to protect you from? Yet here you are, doing it to yourselves." Stoneface, seeing his support crumbling, made one last desperate move. He rushed toward Sarah with his knife drawn, but found himself facing not just Nahuel and Black Bear, but a wall of his own warriors. They had made their choice, wisdom over fear, peace over division. As the winter sun began its descent, the canyon held a tableau of transformation, the broken peace pipe in standing. Birch's hands, Young Hawk's blood on the earth, Stoneface surrounded by those who had chosen a different path. The ancient petroglyphs looked down on it all, their eternal messages of unity and healing now carrying new meaning. Standing Birch's voice carried the weight of prophecy. "The peace pipe is broken, but perhaps it needed to break for us to see what truly holds us together. Not the pipe itself, but the wisdom it represents, the understanding that peace comes not from forcing others to be like us, but from learning to see ourselves in others." The eagle feather fan moved through the smoke-filled air with deliberate purpose, guided by hands gnarled with age, but sure in their sacred duty. Night Eagle, eldest of the tribal shamans, had arrived as the sun touched the western canyon rim, drawn by dreams that could no longer be ignored. With him came 4 other shamans, each carrying signs of their office, medicine bundles, sacred rattles, and ancient tokens passed down through generations. "The spirits are restless," Night Eagle announced, his blind eyes somehow seeing more than those with sight. "They speak of a prophecy unfolding, the one our ancestors called the breaking and joining." The canyon had grown still after the day's violence. Young Hawk's wound was being tended by Sarah and Standing Birch, their combined healing knowledge working to save the Songkeeper's life. Stoneface stood apart, surrounded by his own thoughts and former warriors, while Black Bear maintained an uneasy peace between the factions. Night Eagle moved to the center of the gathering, his eagle feather fan continuing its mysterious dance through the smoke of sacred herbs. "Long ago," he began, his voice carrying the weight of tribal memory, "our ancestors spoke of a time when the people would face a great division. Not from outside forces, but from within, a breaking that would either destroy us or transform us. The other shamans had formed a circle, their rattles adding rhythm to Night Eagle's words. The sound seemed to awaken something in the canyon, walls themselves, making the ancient petroglyphs shimmer in the fading light. They spoke of a stranger who would come in winter's heart, Night Eagle continued, one who carried two medicines, two wisdoms. This stranger would be both the cause of breaking and the key to joining. His blind eyes turned unerringly towards Sarah. "Tell me, daughter of two worlds, what medicines do you carry?" Sarah looked up from tending young hawk, her hands stained with healing herbs from both her traditions. "I carry the knowledge of my grandmother, who learned from your people," she said, "and the learning of my own people who forgot that all healing comes from the same earth." Night Eagle nodded, as if hearing confirmation of something long known. "And you," he turned to Nahuel, "warrior who chose mercy over law, what wisdom guided your choice?" "I heard the voices of our ancestors," Nahuel replied, "speaking not of walls built from fear, but of bridges built from understanding." The shaman's rattles grew louder, their rhythm matching the pulse of the gathering dusk. Night Eagle moved to where the broken peace pipe lay, touching each piece with his fan. "This breaking was foretold," he said, "but the prophecy speaks not just of what is broken, but of what will be reformed." Standing Birch stepped forward, her own medicine pouch open in her hands. From it, she drew items that caught the last rays of sunlight, strands of sinew, pieces of shell, fragments of ancient pottery. "Like this pipe," she said, "some things must break before they can be remade stronger." Night Eagle's voice took on a deeper resonance. "The prophecy tells of a time when our people would have to choose between the strength of walls and the strength of bridges. It speaks of pain, yes, but also of transformation." His fan touched young Hawk's wound gently. "Some blood must flow for truth to be seen." The other shamans had begun a soft chant, words in a dialect so old few could understand them. Yet the meaning seemed to seep into the gathering like water into dry earth. Even Stoneface found himself swaying slightly to their rhythm. "Look well at this moment," Night Eagle commanded. "See how the stranger brings not contamination, but completion. See how the broken pipe speaks not of ending, but of beginning. The prophecy tells us that wisdom, like water, must sometimes break its banks to find new channels." As darkness settled fully over the canyon, the shamans' chanting grew stronger. Their rattles spoke of heartbeats, of ancient rhythms, of changes that moved like rivers through time. Night Eagle's fan continued its dance, weaving patterns that seemed to connect all present, council warriors and rebels, healers and wounded, old and young. "The choice lies before us now," the blind shaman declared. "We can cling to the shell of what was, or we can embrace the spirit of what might be. The prophecy speaks of both paths, one leading to slow death behind walls of fear, the other to renewal through the courage to change." Sarah had finished tending young Hawk's wound. The songkeeper's eyes were open now, and his voice, though weak, joined the shaman's chant. One by one, others began to add their voices. First Standing Birch, then Black Bear, then warriors from both sides of the broken peace pipe. Night Eagle raised his fan high, catching the first starlight on its feathers. "The breaking has come as it was foretold. Now we must choose. Will we remain broken, or will we find the courage to be remade?" Dawn revealed a new tribal staff, planted at the canyon's entrance, its surface adorned with symbols that bridged generations of wisdom. Crafted through the night by Night Eagle and Standing Birch, it combined traditional Apache patterns with designs that Sarah recognized from her own people's healing traditions. Eagle feathers hung alongside traded settler beads, while medicine, bundles from various tribes, were bound together with sinew and prayer. The staff stood as a testament to change, its very existence challenging the notion that purity meant isolation. Warriors who had fought each other the day before now gathered around it, speaking in hushed tones about Night Eagle's prophecy and the choices that lay before them. "See how the patterns flowed together," Standing Birch explained to a group of young warriors, her fingers tracing the intricate designs. Like streams joining to form a river, each bringing its own strength to the whole. She pointed to a spiral pattern near the top. This is Apache wisdom, passed down through generations. And here, her hand moved to an interwoven design. This comes from the northern tribes. Together they tell a story of healing that belongs to all peoples. Sarah stood nearby, watching as more tribal members arrived from the main camp. Word of the shaman's intervention had spread quickly, drawing those who had been hesitant to take sides. Among them came mothers, whose children she had helped heal, warriors who had witnessed the power of shared knowledge, and elders who remembered the old stories of cooperation between peoples. Black Bear, his massive frame somehow softened by recent events, addressed the gathering. For too long, we have mistaken rigidity for strength. The council taught us that unchanging ways meant survival. But look at this staff. It stands stronger because it carries many wisdoms, not in spite of them. Young Hawk, his wound healing well thanks to the combined medicines of two traditions, raised his voice in a new song. It carried echoes of ancient Apache melodies, but wove in harmonies that Sarah recognized from her own people's healing chants. Others joined in, the sound growing stronger as it bounced off canyon walls that had witnessed so much change. Even Stoneface's remaining supporters found themselves drawn to the new staff's promise. One by one, they approached to touch its surface, each contact a small surrender of fear, a quiet acceptance of transformation. Stoneface himself stood apart, but his eyes never left the staff, as if seeing in it a truth he had long denied. Night Eagle moved through the gathering like smoke, his blind eyes seeming to see the invisible threads that were beginning to weave people back together. "The prophecy speaks of this moment," he said, his voice carrying to all corners of the canyon, "when the breaking leads not to ending, but to beginning. When fear's walls fall not to force, but to understanding." Sarah and Standing Birch worked together near the staff's base, preparing medicines that combined their different traditions. Their easy cooperation, the natural flow of shared knowledge between them, spoke louder than any words about the possibility of change without loss of identity. "Our strength was never in standing alone," Standing Birch declared, her voice strong with conviction. "It was in learning to stand together, each bringing their own medicine to the circle." She held up a newly crafted medicine bag that combined Apache beadwork with settler-style stitching. "Like this bag, we are made stronger by carrying many wisdoms." As the sun climbed higher, more changes became visible. Warriors who had once enforced the council's rigid laws now sat with Sarah, learning her healing ways. Young mothers taught their children songs that spoke of bridges instead of walls. The new tribal staff cast a shadow that seemed to touch everyone, its presence a constant reminder of the choice they were making, not between old and new, but between fear and wisdom. The transformation was not complete, but its direction was clear. Like water finding new channels after a storm, the tribe was beginning to flow in ways that honored both tradition and change. The breaking had indeed led to joining, just as the prophecy had foretold. The winter storm came without warning, turning the world white and dangerous. Heavy snow sealed the canyon's entrance, while bitter winds probed every crevice of the lodges. In Standing Birch's dwelling, a shared winter blanket spread across laps that days before had been divided by fear and suspicion. The blanket itself told the story of their transformation, one half traditional Apache weaving, the other settler-style patchwork, joined together by Sarah's and Standing Birch's combined handiwork. "In my settlement," Sarah said, her hands working a new batch of medicines, "we never survived winters alone. Even those who distrusted each other would share resources when the snow grew deep." She looked up at Stoneface, who had been forced to seek shelter in the lodge when the storm hit. "Nature teaches us what pride often prevents us from learning." The old warrior said nothing, but accepted the cup of heated medicine she offered. Outside, the wind's howl seemed to underscore the wisdom of her words. No one could stand alone against such weather. Black Bear returned from checking the other lodges, snow crusting his shoulders. "The hunting parties are trapped on the high ridges," he reported grimly. "And our winter stores were divided between the main camp and here. Neither group has enough to last if this storm holds." Standing, Birch nodded as if she had expected this. "Then we must do what our ancestors did in times of hardship, find strength in coming together." She turned to Stoneface. "You know the location of the main camp's storage caves. We know where the resistance has hidden its supplies. Only by sharing can either group survive." The storm raged for 3 days, forcing former enemies into intimate proximity. In Standing Birch's lodge, Sarah taught Stoneface's daughter how to mix medicines for frostbite, while the warrior himself helped Nahuel reinforce the lodge's walls against the wind. Necessity broke down barriers that argument never could. Young Hawk, still recovering from his wound, began a song that spoke of ancient times when the tribe had faced similar trials. "The storm cares not for our divisions," he sang. "The wind knows nothing of council laws. In the white darkness, we must all share the same warmth or share the same fate." By the 3rd night, when supplies ran lowest and the wind reached its fiercest pitch, Stoneface finally spoke what many had begun to understand. "Perhaps," he said quietly, watching Sarah show his daughter how to stitch a tear in the shared blanket, "strength lies not in the height of our walls, but in the breadth of our circle." The storm passed, but its lesson remained, written in shared hardship and mutual survival. The blanket that had covered former enemies became a symbol of their transformation, a tangible reminder that nature's challenges make no distinction between old ways and new, between fear and wisdom. In facing the storm together, they had discovered a truth as old as the mountains themselves, that survival often depends not on keeping others out, but on letting them in. The council medallion lay broken on the ground, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun in fractured pieces. Lightning Walker, the council's eldest member, had cast it down himself after hearing the stories of how the divided tribe had survived the great storm. The symbolic act marked the end of an era, the shattering of authority based on fear and isolation. "For 30 winters," Lightning Walker announced to the gathered tribe, "I have worn this medallion, believing it represented the strength of our people. But strength, I now see, is not in the metal we wear, but in the bonds we forge." His eyes moved from the shared winter blanket to the new tribal staff, then to Sarah and Standing Birch. "We sought to preserve our ways by building walls, only to discover we were walling wisdom out." The remaining council members stood in a loose circle, their own medallions hanging heavy around their necks. One by one, they too began to remove. Each removal accompanied by words of reflection and recognition. "We forgot," said Running Stream, the council's second eldest, "that the strongest trees are those that bend in the storm, not those that stand rigid until they break." She placed her medallion beside the pieces of Lightning Walker's. "Our people survived countless winters not by standing alone, but by learning from every source of wisdom the spirits sent us." Stoneface, who had experienced the storm's lesson, firsthand stepped forward. The change in him was visible, the hardness in his eyes replaced by something deeper, more contemplative. "I fought to protect our ways," he said, "but in doing so nearly destroyed the very heart of who we are." His medallion joined the others on the ground. "Our strength was never in our isolation, but in our ability to grow while keeping our roots deep." Black Bear, who had walked the difficult path between old and new, spoke next. "The storm taught us what the council forgot, that survival depends not on the strength of our walls, but on the wisdom of our hearts." He gestured to the shared winter blanket, now become a symbol of their transformation. Like this blanket, we are stronger when we weave different wisdoms together. Sarah stood quietly with Nahuel and Standing Birch, watching as the old power structure dissolved, not through violence or force, but through recognition of deeper truths. Young Hawk, fully healed now, began to sing a song that blended traditional Apache melodies with healing chants Sarah had taught him. The sound seemed to help ease the transition, offering continuity even in the midst of change. Lightning Walker raised his hands to the gathered tribe. "The council, as we knew it, ends. Today," he declared. "But our people's wisdom tells us that every ending is also a beginning. We must create a new way of leadership, one that honors both our roots and our need to grow." Standing Birch stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "Our ancestors knew that wisdom, like water, must flow freely to remain pure. They left us signs in the canyon walls, stories in our songs, and truth in our medicines. Perhaps it is time to return to their deeper understanding." The discussion that followed was unlike any tribal gathering in living memory. Young voices, mixed with old, women spoke with the same authority as warriors, and even children were heard when they had wisdom to offer. Sarah's presence, once a source of controversy, now seemed to symbolize the possibility of bridging worlds without losing identity. As the sun reached its peak, a new structure began to emerge, a circle of leaders drawn from all aspects of tribal life. Healers would sit beside warriors, wisdom keepers beside hunters, youth beside elders. The rigid hierarchy of the council would be replaced by a flowing exchange of knowledge and perspective, much like the shared medicines that had helped them survive the winter storm. The broken medallions were gathered up, not to be discarded, but to be remade into something new. "Like our people," Lightning Walker said, holding the fragments, "these will be reformed, carrying the memory of what was, but embracing what must be." The metal would be melted down and reformed into symbols for the new circle of leaders, each piece a reminder of how breaking can lead to remaking. The day ended with a ceremony that belonged neither wholly to the old ways nor entirely to the new. As darkness fell, the tribe gathered around a fire that seemed to burn with unusual brightness, casting light on faces that showed both the weight of change and the relief of finding a new path forward. The mixed medicine garden took shape as winter's grip began to loosen, a physical manifestation of the tribe's transformation. Near Standing Birch's lodge, traditional Apache healing plants grew alongside specimens Sarah had brought from the settlement lands. The garden's design itself told the story of change, circular plots following tribal patterns, but incorporating growing techniques Sarah had learned from European settlers. Each plant has its own wisdom, Standing Birch explained to a group of young tribal members, both former council supporters and resistance fighters now working side by side. Just as each people carries knowledge worth preserving. She knelt to touch a small green shoot pushing through the soil. "This one comes from our ancestors. Beside it grows its settler cousin. Together they make a medicine stronger than either alone." The new tribal laws were being written with the same spirit of integration. In the main lodge, Lightning Walker sat with Black Bear, Sarah, and other members of the newly formed Circle of Voices. They worked to craft guidelines that would protect tribal identity while remaining open to beneficial change. "Our oldest stories," Lightning Walker said, tracing figures on a piece of bark, "speak of strength through adaptation. Like the river that flows around rocks rather than breaking against them, we must learn to move with change while keeping our course true." Sarah, now officially recognized as a tribal healer, added her perspective. "In my settlement, rigid laws broke people apart. But here, I've seen how guidelines can bring people together when they grow from shared wisdom rather than fear." The changes rippled through every aspect of tribal life. Warriors who had once patrolled boundaries looking for outsiders to drive away now learned to distinguish between threats and opportunities for exchange. Healing ceremonies began to incorporate practices from various traditions, their power seemingly enhanced rather than diminished by the integration. Stoneface, perhaps showing the most dramatic transformation, had taken on the role of teaching young warriors about the difference between strength and rigidity. "Look at the eagle," he would say, pointing to the bird soaring above the canyon. "It stays aloft, not by fighting the wind, but by understanding how to move with it." The mixed medicine garden became a symbol of their new way. Women from the tribe would gather there in the lengthening spring days, learning from both Standing Birch and Sarah. They shared stories as they worked the soil, their laughter carrying. Up the canyon walls, where ancient hands had carved images of healing and hope. "The earth knows no boundaries," Standing Birch often said, showing how different plants could support each other's growth. "Why should wisdom be any different?" Young Hawk, fully recovered, had begun composing new songs that captured this time of transformation. His voice would rise in the evening air, carrying melodies that wove together traditional rhythms with new harmonies. From broken ground, new growth appears. From divided hearts, understanding grows. The winds of change bring not our fears, but wisdom that the future knows. The true test of their transformation came when a group of Navajo healers arrived at the canyon's entrance, drawn by stories of the Apache tribe that had found a way to balance tradition with change. Instead of being turned away, they were welcomed. Their knowledge was exchanged for Apache wisdom, while Sarah's presence helped bridge cultural gaps that might once have seemed insurmountable. "This is how our ancestors lived," Night Eagle reminded. "Everyone as they gathered to share medicines and stories, not in fear of difference, but in celebration of how each new perspective could enrich our understanding." As spring took hold in the canyon, the mixed medicine garden flourished, its vibrant growth a testament to the power of integration. Like the garden, the tribe had found that diversity could strengthen rather than weaken, that growth came not from isolation, but from the courage to remain open while staying true to one's roots. The ancient petroglyphs seemed to watch it all with timeless approval, their messages of healing and harmony no longer just historical artifacts, but living principles guiding the tribe into its new future. The breaking had led to joining, fear had given way to wisdom, and the tribe had rediscovered a truth their ancestors had known, that strength flows not from walls, but from bridges. The unity necklace caught the spring sunlight as Standing Birch fastened it around Sarah's neck. Created from the melted council medallions, it combined Apache beadwork with settler-style silverwork, each element flowing into the other in an endless circle. The ceremony marked not just Sarah's formal acceptance into the tribe, but a deeper healing of old wounds. "See how the metal remembers its breaking," Standing Birch said, touching the place where different traditions merged in the necklace's design. "Yet in its remaking, it has become stronger, more beautiful." Her weathered fingers traced the pattern that spoke of two cultures becoming one without either losing its essence. Former council members stood beside resistance fighters, their old divisions softened by shared experiences and newfound understanding. Stoneface's daughter, now apprenticing with both Sarah and Standing Birch, wore a similar necklace that marked her role as a bridge between traditions. The girl's presence beside her father seemed to complete some vital circuit of healing, as if the generations themselves were being mended. Young Hawk's voice rose in song, carrying words that spoke of wounds transformed into wisdom, of breaking, changed to blessing. The tribe joined in, their voices combining in harmonies that would have been impossible in the days of rigid separation. Even those who had once fought most fiercely against change now added their voices to the chorus of renewal. In this moment of healing, the canyon itself seemed to breathe with new life, its ancient walls witnessing yet another transformation in the long story of their people. The unity necklace gleamed, a symbol of how breaking can lead not to ending, but to new beginning. The new tribal banner rose against the morning sky, its surface alive with symbols of transformation. Crafted by hands from every faction of the former divide, it told the story of their journey from fear to wisdom. Traditional Apache designs flowed into new patterns, while ancient symbols of healing danced alongside fresh marks of change. At its center, a great spiral spoke of growth without loss, of moving forward while staying true to one's core. Young leaders emerged beneath its flowing presence. Stoneface's daughter led a group of children in gathering medicines, her lessons combining grandmother's wisdom with new learning. Blackbear's son, once the most rigid of young warriors, now taught fighting techniques that incorporated flexibility alongside strength. "Like the river," he would say, echoing the new teachings, "we must learn to flow around obstacles while keeping our essential nature." This morning, watching the banner catch the wind, Standing Birch saw the future taking shape. Sarah stood among a group of tribal youth, her presence no longer a symbol of controversy, but a living bridge between worlds. The old woman smiled, seeing in their eager faces the promise of generations yet to come, who would know no boundaries to wisdom, no walls around healing. The story-keeper's drum spoke with new rhythms as young hawks shared their tale with visiting tribes. Its beat carried the message of transformation across territories and traditions, each retelling adding depth to the story of how one tribe found strength through openness rather than isolation. The drum itself, like their journey, merged old ways with new understanding. Its traditional Apache construction adorned with symbols that spoke of bridges built between peoples. Word spread through the trading networks, carried by merchants and medicine people who had witnessed the change. They told of Apache warriors who protected wisdom instead of boundaries, of healing practices that drew strength from diversity, of a tribe that had turned potential destruction into rebirth. Some spoke of the settler woman who had been left to freeze, but instead helped thaw frozen hearts, while others focused on the young warrior who chose mercy over rigid law. The stories reached even Sarah's former settlement, where they sparked quiet conversations about the nature of wisdom and the cost of fear. A few brave souls began making the journey to the canyon, seeking healing that combined both worlds. Each visitor returned with tales that challenged old prejudices, their words planting seeds of change in hardened ground. Winter returned to the canyon, but this time its bitter winds found a different tribe than they had left. Sarah stood at the spot where Nahuel had found her a year before, the double spiral pendant at her throat catching the morning light. The pendant, crafted from silver that once adorned council medallions, told the story of their transformation. One spiral turning inward to honor tradition, the other reaching outward to embrace change. Standing Birch joined her, their shared blanket wrapped against the cold. Together they watched young tribal members gathering medicines from beneath the snow, their methods blending old knowledge with new understanding. Near the ancient juniper, a tree that had once sheltered a dying stranger, a group of visiting healers from different tribes learned from Stoneface's daughter, their presence a testament to how far the ripples of change had spread. "The winter brings its own wisdom," Standing Birch said softly, touching the spiral pendant. "It reminds us that endings and beginnings are part of the same circle." She smiled as young Hawk's voice rose in song, carrying their story to the winds that had once carried only fear. Some must freeze before others can thaw. The ancient petroglyphs watched over it all, their healing hands reaching across time to touch this moment of completion, where what was broken had been remade stronger, and wisdom flowed free as spring waters beneath the winter ice.